Hello and welcome to this podcast of session number 17 for the theory class. We're going to continue our study of rondo form, and before we do that I want to I'll go to the board just briefly and give you a few more reminders about the composition project if you choose to use a rondo form for your project. And then, because we have introduced rondo form, I'm not going to be using our time to define the form and explain it. Rather, I'd like to look at examples from the literature. You see Nathaniel Dett, Florence Price, and John Antill, and I'd like to tell you about these composers and their music and why they chose to use rondo form for their particular piece. So really practical application, not just what is rondo, but how would a composer know that that would be a good form to use for a particular movement or a particular piece. And then we'll continue getting into examples of the 5-part and remind you about the 7-part and so forth in theory and as well as in the oral skills. So we'll continue revisiting what the concept is, and of course we'll leave it up to you to ask questions if there's anything not clear. Rondo form is usually pretty clear, and especially I think if we have a little more flexibility with the term. I was just speaking with a colleague recently, and he was describing some piece. He says this is a rondo form, and it's A, B, A, B, A, and there's no C, and he described that as a rondo form. And the piece is called rondo, and well, they don't follow this exact textbook version that we're talking about here. And so as we get further into our study of rondo form, we'll see some other examples that are called rondo form, and well, then we'll ask the question, we'll discuss how helpful is that term? Is that still a good term even though it's not the textbook model? And then same thing we'll do when we get to sonata allegro. We'll talk about what's the so-called textbook model. And then as we get into our study with that, we'll see deviations from the model and not such strict adherence. And then we'll be considering the question, is it still a useful term to understand the shape of the piece? Well, really quickly, I want to go to the board here and just use just a few minutes to talk about the composition project here. All right, so we're going to talk about the composition project, some really important details. And so one thing that we want to remember is that it's not a composition class. This is a theory class. So the fundamental objective is to apply concepts that we've learned during the term. So with it being a theory class, we want you to include not just your name and title of the piece, but really important, we need you to provide an analysis of your piece. So a formal analysis. If you chose to write a rondo, then specify, all right, here's my name, here's the title of the piece, and rondo. Okay, indicate that it's a rondo, and then you would mark on your score, here's the A section, and here's the key of the A section. Is there a transition? Well, then mark that. If you don't have a transition, that's fine. Here's my B section, and here's the key. Here's the C section, here's the key. So indicate all the formal components on the score. And so then, of course, you don't need to provide a harmonic analysis. This is important. We're not expecting that you would put 5 7s and cadential 6 4s all over the place for every chord in your piece. But you do need to mark the Neapolitan, the augmented 6, and the enharmonic modulation. Any of the chords that are required in the directions, we need you to label those for your sake, because if you make a mistake and you misspell or have incorrect voice leading and we're looking at it and well, where's the Neapolitan in here? I don't see one. And maybe because it's misspelled, then we wouldn't be able to award as much credit as if you made an effort, made a mistake, but hey, it's marked. That's what he or she means to be a Neapolitan 6. We could still award some credit because we'd see what you intended to do. And so those kinds of things are very important. So I'm just going to make a few quick markings here. So composition project. So just keep in mind that the purpose of this project is to apply concepts that we've learned this term. So we've learned about the Neapolitan, the augmented 6 sonorities, and we've learned enharmonic modulation, and we're learning rondo form now, and we will be learning the sonata allegro form, different types of that. And if you choose to write rondo, well, then you want to be specific. Don't just say rondo. You want to say what kind of rondo it is. And so whether it's a 5-part or a 7-part, and you would mark those sections on the score. I think including a table would be really good. We're talking about getting into the A+ register now, going beyond the expectations to show with absolute clarity what you're trying to do. That would be really good to do that. And it also allows us to evaluate your work more accurately and more efficiently, and get the grades done more quickly and so forth. All right, so the composition project, I'm not going to write the objective down, but I'll just say keep in mind the purpose of it. Keep that in mind as you're working on your project, and you should be already working on it now. You don't need to wait till the end of the term, and so now I'll remind you about that in a minute too. But then also include analysis. So formal and tonal analysis. Okay, that's really important. Not harmonic. You can include a harmonic analysis if you want to. And maybe if you had some mistakes with the form or the tonality not very clear, but you went the extra mile including a harmonic analysis, well, anything that you do, we want to award credit. I mean, so if you want to include, it's just not required. Okay, so those are two important things to remember, and then the other is specify the form. Okay, so you want to include the analysis on the score and specify the form on the score. So you're in a way not just writing a piece, but you're teaching us what you did. Okay, and so if you wanted to, you could even write a paragraph, a couple hundred words explaining what you did, what your process was. That would be fine. And I think it would be great to give you the opportunity to discuss that process with your classmates as well. So I'll think about maybe including discussion questions for that, so you could bounce ideas off of each other. All right, and so these are really important criteria that you want to include. Now, about how you're evaluated. It's not a composition class. We're not going to be subjective and write a critical review, anything like that. We're trying to grade objectively. So did you follow the directions? So I look at it this way. There's the content, and we would say about 40% content. Did you follow the directions? Is this a rondo? Does this have the Neapolitan? Does it have the augmented six? Does it have an harmonic modulation? Does it have what the directions are requiring? Does it have the content? And then the organization. Okay, is the form clear? Is it clearly a 5-part rondo? Even if you didn't have the labels on there, is it clear? And maybe if it's not so clear, but you included the labels, we could award more credit that way, even if it's not quite as clear, or if it could be clearer. Okay, so keep that in mind. Organization, is the form clear? After all, this is about writing in one of these large forms, but including some of the chromatic harmonies that we talked about. So these are biggies here. And then the other would be, I guess mechanical would be the word I'd put down. And this, by the mechanical, I mean, is it legible? If you wrote it by hand, is it legible? Are notes lined up where we can read it and we can make sense out of what you wrote? If you used notation software, which is great, that looks very nice. Well, then is it one measure per page and it's 50 pages long? That kind of thing. Or is it formatted nicely, professional job, it's something that would be presentable? Is it performable? Is it playable? Are there staves missing? This legibility, very practical. do we have the is the document formatted in such a way that we can make sense out of what you did? So the equivalent would be in an essay, if you have all kind of grammatical errors and spelling errors that would prevent or hinder our ability to understand what you're trying to communicate, that would be under the category of mechanical. And so I recommend, this kind of an evaluation. It's very objective. It's straightforward. It's not about anybody's opinion of your piece. Maybe in a composition class, the teacher in a composition class would have more input for that kind of thing based on experience. And we're just following the directions here because we're applying the concepts from the theory class. If you have any questions about it, let me know, or your GE. We're happy to clarify. I hope this will be a help to you. The other thing is, I said that you could already be working on your project now, and I just want to remind you that even if you don't know whether you want to write a rondo or go to sonata, maybe you don't know if you want to write a 5-part rondo, a 7-part, maybe you don't know the form yet, haven't nailed this down yet, but you can still be working on the project because you can write opener, closer, antecedent, opener, closer, consequent, and that would be, an A block, or the primary theme of a sonata allegro. We haven't gotten into that yet, but this could be used for multiple purposes. You don't have to have it nailed down what the purpose is going to be yet, what the shape is going to be. You can start working on it. And then you just do another one of these, and there's your B section, or your second theme group of a sonata allegro. And if you want to make a rondo, then have a third one of those, and that would be your C section. If you want it to be a 7-part rondo, you still just need the 3 if you do this way, A, B, A, C, A, B, A. Okay? And so you still just need 3 blocks. The opener, closer, antecedent, opener, closer, consequent. And you don't have to have antecedent consequent relation, but I recommend that. Not all rondos will have that. Not all sonata allegros will have that. But I recommend it just so you can keep reinforcing your knowledge of the phrase structure. So whether you go with a 5-part or a 7-part, you see you just need an A block, a B block, and a C block of sound, and it's just how you arrange them. Transitions are optional. Retransitions are optional. You can have them or leave them out, however you please for the rondo. If you had them, that could be just an opener, or it could be just a closer, is all it would be. It's not a phrase. Okay, so that's about all I wanted to say about the composition project. And when we as we move forward, we might just give you a few more reminders, but want to encourage you to be working on that so that at the end of the term, it's not starting on the project, that it's just polishing the project at that point. That's what we're hoping for. Okay, and so if we could be of any help, let us know. And for the remainder of our time, the most of our time, I want to walk through these 3 different pieces by R. Nathaniel Dett, Florence Price, and then John Antill, composers of different backgrounds, and so, but yet they're all 3 are using rondo form, and for the same purpose, I should say, at that. And so I look forward to getting into that. I'm going to pause briefly and clear the board here, and in case I need to make additional markings, and then we'll get into the score and talk about why these people use in rondo form for this particular piece. What's their background? What motivated them to use this classical form? They've got all these choices. You can see from their dates. They're living in the 20th century. They could write 12-tone music if they want to, so they've got all kind of choices available to them. Why did they choose rondo form for this particular movement of this particular piece, and they don't use it over here, but they do over here? Why? And we'll talk about that. How did they know to do that, and was that a good choice? And we'll see some consistency between all 3 of them, even though they're very different, and they wouldn't have, I know John Antill would not have known R. Nathaniel Dett or Florence Price. He wouldn't have known them at all. He's on the other side of the world. Okay, so look forward to getting into that. Let me just pause, clean the board. Okay, so if we could go to the camera here, I've got the score lined up for us. And, before I give you the score, I want to display this table here. And so this is a table I've just made. I think I've got 9 columns here. You can make this very easily in Excel. You could use this if you're listening to a piece or studying a piece and you're trying to decide, hey, is this a rounded binary? Is this a binary? Is it a ternary? Is it a rondo? Is it sonata allegro? Is it a sonata rondo? You could use this same template here for a lot of different pieces, okay? So a lot of different shapes, a lot of different forms. And so I just went into Excel and did this. And the reason why I made 9 is, well, there's such a thing as a 9-part rondo. And even if I had a 5-part rondo, what if I wanted to mark the transitions and retransitions? And so it gives me enough space. And if I don't want to mark them, then I just use only 5 of the columns and call it good. If it's rounded binary, then I just use 3 of the columns and call it good. And so it's nice to have something like this, or you could have blank paper if you want to. And the reason for the rows, of course, up here is where I would put my formal components, such as, there's an introduction, there's a coda, there's the A section, there's the first theme group. I would put in the top row over here. And then I'd put the measure numbers. And you could put measure ranges, or just say measure 1, measure 17, whatever you want to do. And then down here in the third row, I like to put the time. And so I could get to the recording to hear that really easily if I want to. And instead of just flipping pages and then fast forwarding and hoping that I get to the right place. So this would be the time. I can mark these. So measure numbers, form component, time, and then this would be key. And again, I'm not putting harmonic analysis. There's no room for that, but I put key. And then even down below, if I notice something, hey, there was a really interesting German diminished third over in such and such place, or there was a modulation using a leading tone 7. I might make a marking underneath the key, the row for the keys, but it's just whatever you feel like you need to do would be good. So this is something that I think would be worthwhile to have as you move forward studying the rondo forms. And now what I want to do is display the score here for our Nathaniel Dett's Juba Dance. But before we study the piece, I need to tell you a little bit about him. Okay, I mean, so he's a composer. I'm hoping that some of us have heard about him by now, because we looked at some of his music this term. We looked at some with the augmented 6, from the Cinnamon Grove. That was a little bit later, 1928. This is from another suite entitled In the Bottoms from 1913. And at the time, I don't think I really said much about him, and so I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. And then when we go to Florence Price, tell you about her, and you'll see something that's common between the two, why they chose to write a rondo form in their respective pieces there. So our Nathaniel Dett was of course a good composer and an educator, and he was also a conductor. And so that's important to know about him. In 1908, you see, he's a contemporary of Stravinsky, and in 1908, he was the first black American to receive a bachelor's degree in music. And this is from Oberlin College there in Ohio. After finishing at Oberlin, he continued his studies at Columbia there in New York and Harvard. And then he went on to France to study with Nadia Boulanger there in Paris. And when I just think about those credentials, if I just hit the pause button right there, I'm thinking, my, those are extremely impressive credentials. Oberlin's a great school. Columbia, Harvard, Nadia Boulanger, many of the composers that we talk about in the curriculum have these same credentials. And yet, so does our Nathaniel Dett, but he's never included in the curriculum. And so other other composers, just for example, who studied with Nadia Boulanger. Well, Aaron Copland and David Diamond and Philip Glass and Roy Harris, and there's an African-American composer named Adolphus Hailstork who's still alive, the last I knew. And the Danish composer Per Norgård, he studied with her, and Virgil Thompson, and then George Walker studied with Nadia Boulanger. So these are all top-notch, internationally renowned composers, and many of them are standard in the music history courses and music theory courses that universities around the world include. And yet our Nathaniel Dett and George Walker, some of these names are not. Hailstork, George Walker, our Nathaniel Dett, I think it's fair to say they're excluded from the standard, so-called standard repertory. And they have every bit as impressive credentials as composers like Aaron Copland and David Diamond and so forth. And so not only did our Nathaniel Dett study at Columbia and Harvard and with Nadia Boulanger there in Paris, but then he even went to Eastman and got a master's degree in Eastman in 1932. Now, George Walker was the first African American to earn a doctorate, and that was at Eastman, 25 years later. Okay, so our Nathaniel Dett, here he is at Eastman, 1932, which is the same year, by the way, that Florence Price composed her Symphony No. 1 that we'll be looking at momentarily. After finishing his master's degree there at Eastman, he took a teaching position at the Hampton Institute, and I think he was the very first African American to become a chair of a music department. And during his tenure there, that school introduced the Bachelor of Science degree in music, and so very important as an educator, as I was saying. Now, as a composer, our Nathaniel Dett wrote over 100 pieces of music. He was very involved with conducting and his work in education, and so he didn't write like 500 pieces, but he did write over 100, and wide variety of genres. So piano, chorus, solo voice, and he wrote a big piece called. He wrote "Listen to the Lambs," but I'm thinking of an oratorio that he composed. It's a pretty substantial work, and it's the Ordering of Moses is the name of that, and it's based on African American spirituals. And then he also wrote "Listen to the Lambs," but Chariot Jubilee, and he wrote. He was a scholar as well. He wrote extensively and gave speeches on the importance of preserving African American music. And I think he and Samuel Coleridge Taylor and many of these black musicians from the late 1800s into the early 20th century were influenced by Dvorak, because he gave encouragement. He said, you should tap into this heritage that you have here, just as Chopin did with the music of his heritage, and Brahms with his, and even Bartok with his. And these spirituals, that's a gold mine. You should use that in your music and so forth. And so one of the essays that our Nathaniel Dett wrote is called "The Emancipation of Negro Music." And he wrote this in 1918, and of course it was published, and it's complaining. At this time, it was a pretty bold thing to write and bold thing to publish, but it's complaining about white people making fun of blacks and the secular music of blacks, and especially the sacred music of black people. And what the reaction was, this poking fun and marginalizing and making fun of that made a lot of white people and black people ashamed of their own music, and he's speaking against that. This is not right, and so there he was in 1918 saying that, and so I think that he brings to bear in that essay some of the contributions that are being made, some of the progress that's being made even way back there in 1918. So the Jubilee Singers that was organized back in 1871, for example, leading to proper performances of this kind of music that's not making fun of it, but showing how great that music is. And so this is a man named Mr. George White who apparently founded the Jubilee Singers there in 1871. And so, and he mentions a few other composers of his time and predecessors who used African American spirituals in their music without poking fun, but serious, following Dvorak's advice. And of course, he mentioned Samuel Coleridge Taylor, and we'll look at him in I believe in session number 19, or we'll revisit him at least. And so he mentions that. And, it's interesting in that essay, he cites Edward MacDowell. He said, Edward MacDowell used African-American themes in one of his suites. He didn't specify which suite. And so I did a little bit of research into that. And no, he didn't. Nathaniel Dett was mistaken, to the best of my knowledge. Edward MacDowell made the comment, I don't want to use African-American spirituals because of the negative, the negative connotations. It reminded him of slavery, and not that he's prejudiced, but he didn't want to be reminded of slavery. You're thinking that's a bad thing. He did not want to use that. So what did Edward MacDowell use? He used Native American themes in one of his suites, and he specifically pointed out that's heroic. When I think of the Native American themes, that's heroic type of quality to it, and reminds us of heroic things that with the Native Americans, and so he actually opted not to include the African American, as best as I can tell. Another essay that R. Nathaniel Dett wrote in 1920, so a little over 100 years ago, he's outlining what would contribute to serious recognition of African American music and the use of these spirituals. And all this is really important and pertinent to what we're going to notice here with this answering this question, why did he use a rondo in this particular piece? Knowing what this Juba dance is, I think, is important to answering that question. And so he's talking about, again, the Jubilee Singers again, and the success that they've had, and factors that are contributing to the improvements in the reception of African American music in 1920. And he mentions, Samuel Coleridge Taylor again, and Henry T. Burleigh, another composer who's done a lot to advance the serious perception, recognizing the value of this kind of music, as Dvorak recommended. And he even mentions some of the black composers who implement African American music, spirituals, in larger so-called classical works. And so I don't mean classical period, but I mean art music. And so ballet and opera and the symphony and oratorio, for example, these larger type of genres. And so William Grant Still, hopefully you learn about some of these in your history class. And an opera by Ollie Graham, that's probably somebody you never heard of before, but it's an opera by an African-American composer using African-American spirituals. William Dawson composed a symphony, as did, I believe, William Grant Still. And then, of course, I just mentioned the oratorio. R. Nathaniel Dett contributed to that genre, among others. And then he pointed out that some of this music breaks free of the African American spirituals, evoking that heritage, and it's just simply American music written by a composer with dark skin. And I think that's ultimately what he was advocating for. And I know years later, more recently, when I was having conversations with Dr. George Walker, he said, why does everybody have to keep saying I'm an African American composer? Why can't you just say I'm an American composer? And so Yes, I mean, so I think that's ultimately what people hope for, is we don't have to camp out on the color of the person's skin. Just, this is an American composer, and that's kind of what our Nathaniel Dett was pushing for over 100 years ago. So very important, not just as a composer, educator, scholar, conductor, yeah, all-around musician, very important there. And so let's get into the music now. I want to talk a little bit about the music, and we'll listen to it. And I encourage you to get out this template that I've mentioned here, the table. Make one, have a blank sheet of paper. Go ahead and start off with the A if you want to. It looks to me like we don't have an introduction here, that it just hits the ground running. And what I want to do is just simply play the piece, noticing again the length. These are short pieces today, so this is only 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I still think what I'll do is just play it the one time, and you know, I'm gonna, if I could, I'm gonna maybe make some markings on the board just to kind of guide us as we further ourselves into the piece here. And I don't think I really need to make any markings, but there's no introduction here, so we'll call this the A section. And I want to draw our attention before we listen. We're just kind of perusing. We say, oh, that looks like it's F major. So just perusing, or glancing rather. Perusing would be an in-depth study. We don't want an in-depth study. And we go over here and we see that there's a first ending, second ending. So maybe that means that we're going to have like A, then the B. Okay, and it's a very fast piece. It's a lively theme, and so this over here maybe is our B section, and so we think about that. Maybe this is the B. Maybe this is a transition. But notice the first and second endings. And, you know, if you've got the score, by all means, point those things out. Flag those. Hey, is this a formal division here? Flag that as you're glancing through the piece. If there's double bar lines and so forth, take advantage of that. Just don't rely on it. We said this with the rounded binary and the ternary forms. Go ahead, consider them, but just don't rely on them. And so I'm definitely noticing that double bar line there, and then I notice over here, oh, there's a key change. So as I come back, maybe this is the B or the transition, I don't know. Knowing ahead of time that it's a rondo, what I'm going to be doing very quickly with the scanning is I'm going to try to find this A section come back again. And so I've got this off to my side. And rather than going left to right, measure after measure, I'm trying to find the return of the A section. How many times does this A section come back? And you know, it looks like it's here, but we would need a contrast. So you could just put a check mark. You know, you could flag that, flag these things. Go ahead and make markings. And you could even put question marks. You know, is this a B? But I'm looking for the A section. And so I see it right here. There's an A section. And then it's just scanning along. And you also notice how long is the A section, because if it really is a return, if it's a refrain, then the whole thing is going to come back usually, okay? And so then we have a key change here. So, hey, is this the C? Right here? And so we notice that it's some similarities with the A, but then is it F major anymore? And the key is different, and it's not exactly the same as the beginning. And we'll listen. We'll use the recording as another important resource for us. And then what about yes, right here, pick up. Yeah, right in here. Looks like the A comes back. All right. So far, it's a 5-part, but we need to go on. Does the A come back yet again? Making it a 7. And then we have this material here. So is this D? I don't know. So I'll just make these markings on the score. If that's D, because it is different, then we would need to see the A come back. And I don't see it. Okay, so, is this a coda? All right, so that's what I mean by just making practical markings. And this table will have that. And by the way, I think you should use that table for your own piece that you're going to write. Have a floor plan, a blueprint, before you just get underway, and have a skeleton, an outline. Just if you were going to write an essay, you would do that too. All right, so let's give this a listen here, and we'll recognize the Rondo form. I suspect it's going to be a 5-part. That's a very lively piece there. So we made some preliminary markings, and we were thrown a few curveballs, and that's okay. It's better to be thrown a curveball than just that goes completely over your head and have no clue what you heard. So let's make some adjustments now. I think we can go back here, and now that we've got a little bit more information, we use the recording to help us. And again, I would be at a piano. Not that I would play all of this. You don't need to be able to play all that. You could play just the melody, down an octave. You could play just the bass. You could play just the downbeats, the chords, one chord. One chord. You're just the harmonies. Anything is better than nothing at all. You don't have to perform the piece. So that's really important. Okay, so we'll definitely say that was the A section here. And then I put over here that the A section, we heard it again. He just repeats it, so that's fine. That's still the A. It's still part of the A. It's a nice theme. And then this was a marked contrast. And so I put B question mark at the time I was listening to it. And then we got to hear the A again. So I'm going to erase my question mark. And yeah, that was a contrast because what followed was the A again. And so the performer ignored this second ending here and came straight to measure 32 over here. And this was our A section again. So far, let's take a look at what we got. We've got A. We'll call that measure 1. Then there's a B, and we could say that it's F major. So I'm just kind of making a summary as I go along. Measure 17. And we could say that it's C major. And then the A comes back at 32. And it's back to F major again. Now remember that, hey, this is 1913. It doesn't have to be, the A section does not have to come back in the same key, but usually it does. Okay, it doesn't have to. By this time period, there could be an A1 and an A2, and only one of those could come back. And so we'll see that later on as well. All right, so then as we move on here, we're being informed by the recording. And so we're going to go to the next page. And that's what we thought was a B. Well, we missed a contrast in measure 17. So this turns out to be a C. And again, how do I know that that's a C? Is because of the A that happens over here tells me that, well, this contrast is not a transition. It really is its own section. And so this would be our C section here. And so I'm going to put that down as well. And so at measure 39, we have the C, and it looks like it starts off in B flat major, and it's defined by different texture. The melody is in the bass, in the left hand, and so forth. I mean, it looks like it's in the right hand. I suppose you could cross your hands if you want to, but at any rate, the melody is at the bottom of the texture, and it's in a different key and different character and so forth. And then, yeah, we have the A section repeats. And so I'm going to put that down. The A section happens right here at measure 58. And I believe it's not in the F major here. I put A prime. It looks like it's starting us off in, let's say G minor. Use the piano as a tool, but I think we would say G minor for that. And then going on, we finally do get the A at measure 77, comes back in the key of F major. Okay, so that's what we have so far. And then we have a coda. That material that I initially said, hey, is that a D? Is that a D section? Well, if it were, then there would be an A follow, and there's no A that follows. So what we have is I could put all this down here, and we see that he bookends the piece, repeating A at the beginning and end, but it's still A, B, A, C, A. Overall, it's A, B, A, C, A. It's a 5-part rondo, and so my table would show how many columns is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 for if you want to mention the coda. So that's why I've got 9 columns. I've got room to show this, and I can even do something like this. Let me show you here. Make it clearer. You could have one of these that shows the A, B, A, C, A coda. So you could do that, and then up here you could say A, B, A, C, A to show. You could use the rows for that if you want. You could be merging cells if you want to do that. So whatever gives you a good understanding of how the piece is structured there. So I think this one is a relatively clear example of a 5-part rondo. Now I'm going to hold off explaining, answering the question, well, why did he use rondo in this piece? I'm going to postpone that until we look at the Florence Price. And then, because that's the third movement of her first symphony here, and if you notice, the subtitle is also called Juba Dance. And so I'm going to talk about both of them as a pair. Why did both of these composers use rondo form for a work that's called Juba Dance? All right, the overall table here, this is what I put together, and maybe you come up with something similar to this. You definitely would want to show the ABACA. And is there a coda or a codetta? I would say that it's a coda, not a codetta. It's a little bit too long of a tail to say that it's just a codetta. And I pointed out just the key areas. And again, I'm not interested in, oh, there was a diminished seventh chord in such and such measure. That's a harmonic analysis. I want a tonal analysis. I want to indicate the key areas. Is he using different keys to reinforce the different sections, to show this is a different section? Is he doing that? Okay, you could, if you wanted to, you could talk about harmonic language. Well, you use the secondary dominants in this section. This one over here is diatonic. This section uses mostly stepwise melodic writing. This one over here uses arpeggio. Whatever you want to do to help you understand one section as differentiated from another, that's fine. All right, so let's keep moving ahead. Let's go to Florence Price now. And so I've got her Symphony number 1, and I want to tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll come back to answering that question. Well, why did these two composers use rondo form? So Florence Price was born in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1887, and she was born at a time when there was a lot of racial tension there, and I think Little Rock was okay, but things became pretty rough there. And if you want more details about her, let me know. There's a lot to say about her, and we are running on the late side here, but I do need to tell you a few things about her. Here she is in Little Rock, Arkansas, and having a hard time finding a job. Being a woman at that time, not going to get a job as a composer, and certainly being an African American and a woman, that's just unheard of to get a job as a composer. She couldn't get a job teaching piano lessons, and so she had a hard time getting a job, even though she had tremendous abilities as a musician. And she was valedictorian of her high school class, and she had given her first piano recital when she was only 4 years old, and wrote her very first piece of music, and I think published it when she was only 11 years old. And so she definitely had the skill as a musician, but just because of the color of her skin, denied, not allowed to get a job. She wasn't allowed to be in the Music Teachers Association because it was only for white people, and so she couldn't be in that, and that was the way to help network and get jobs. So she still stayed there in Little Rock. That was where her family was. But in 1927, I read a statement, and I'll just be honest, I think it was a very watered-down statement. It said because of racial tensions, she, her husband, and 2 kids moved away from their home, and they moved to Chicago. And I think racial tension, so that could be anything. It's not very specific, and so I did a little investigating as to what might have happened in 1927 to spark her to move, because there had already been difficulties, and she had lived there the whole time and didn't leave those other instances. So why this time in 1927 pick up and move to Chicago? And that was a good move on her part, because once she arrived in Chicago, she had all these opportunities. She was very well received and was publishing music and participated in a competition with this very piece and won, and this put her on the map as a composer, and she got recognition and was very, very, very much respected composer. After moving to Chicago, back in Arkansas was a little bit more difficult. Well, so what was this racial tension? Watered down. What happened was on May the 5th of 1927, there was this angry mob of people that hung this black man named John Carter there in Little Rock, Arkansas. They hung him, and they weren't satisfied just to do that. They tied his body to the back of a car, and they dragged his body through downtown Little Rock, Arkansas, there in May the 5th, 1927. And then they drove into the business district where the African Americans had their businesses, and then they poured gasoline on him and lit him up. And so to say racial tension, I think that's not so good. she and her family were in fear for their life is why they left. Things were that bad. She didn't have a problem with white people. She had a problem with being unsafe and being in a dangerous place. That's why she left. And so it was a good move on her part. It was a productive thing. It contributed to who she became as a composer. So now this is her first symphony, and this is the one that won her this very prestigious award, and that got her international recognition eventually. Even in England, she was very widely known there. And the third movement, it's much shorter than the previous two movements. I mean, we're looking like 16 minutes long or something like that, 12 minutes long for the first two, and this is not even 4 minutes. So we're starting to get an idea that whatever Juba dance means, it's something that's short and lively. And for some reason, she and our Nathaniel Dett want to use rondo form for works that are called Juba dance. If you look at her third symphony, she has a Juba dance in that as well. So this begs the question, well, what in the world is a Juba dance? What does that even mean then? And so I want to tell you a little bit about that. The Juba dance it possibly goes back to the 1840s, and it was a type of dance that the African American slaves would perform for enjoyment purposes, and so before the Civil War, on the plantations there in the Deep South, these slaves would dance the Juba dance, and it consisted of clapping hands, tapping your thigh or your knees, and the reason for that, or striking your feet on the floor, and the reason for that is the plantation owners did not want the slaves to have drums because they thought maybe they used those drums to communicate and incite a rebellion. So no drums. Well, they're gonna have percussion with tapping their knee and their thigh, and that's how they developed the Juba dance. And so it involves that. Now the choreography of the Juba dance. This is where we get to the rondo. All right, and yeah, it consisted of clapping the hands and patting the knees and thighs, and that's part of it, striking the feet on the floor. But the Juba dance also included singing a refrain when the word Juba was repeated. Okay, and so this is why I think it lends itself very nicely to rondo form, because you've got these different steps. There's different steps that you could use in the Juba dance. But then there's a refrain in the Juba dance as well, and that's what a rondo is, basically. You've got your B and your C, but you have the refrain, A, come back. And so if you look at our Nathaniel Dett's Juba dance, Symphony number 1, third movement Juba dance, Symphony number 3, third movement Juba dance, all of them use rondo form. And it's all, for some reason, I believe, 5-part rondo across the board. Okay, so that's what we want to notice for why would they use this? They're evoking their African American heritage, and they're using rondo form to do that. And it's very well suited to that. It's an adaptable form. It's not limited to Mozart, Beethoven, and Haydn there in German-speaking areas. It's composers all around the world, and we'll see in a moment John Antill evoking his Australian, the Aboriginal heritage there in Australia, using the same rondo form for that. So let's give this a listen, and then we'll move ahead. Hopefully you have the score so you can follow along, maybe read it more easily. Sounds like the B section. Sounds like a contrast, but it couldn't be because we didn't hear the A before that. There's the A. And it's using A1 and A2. Sounds like C. Section coming back. That's the A2. It's also part of the A. That's a great piece there. I encourage you to listen to the other movements. A very, very gifted composer, and happy to be able to let you know about her. Maybe some of you have already heard of her. So let's go on. Before we wrap up for today, I want to share with you music of John Antill. And so let me just see if I can find that in my stack of papers here. So John Antill, Corroboree is the title of this work. By the way, I didn't make a table of the Florence Price, but I called out the sections, and most important is for you to make a table of it. I have one. If you want to see mine, you're certainly welcome to do that. I can display it here really quickly. Right here, you can kind of see here where I've got the A1, A2. There's two different themes in there, and how do I know that that's not a B? Well, maybe I thought it was, but then another contrasting section happened. And so this is speaking about how we orally perceive the rondo form. Maybe you initially think that this is B, but then you hear this over what follows in 41 seconds in. Oh, that's got to be the B, so that must mean A has two components to it, okay, and that's no problem. And then we have the A, all of this is A, and then we have the C, and then the A1 and the A2. And so overall, 5-part rondo with a coda. All right, and even with our C section here, I said, oh, it's developmental, and it uses material from the A and the B. Remember we said that the C section is a good place to have the climax of the work and to have the most variety and contrasts. And notice that the key area that she goes to is a tritone away from the home key, and it's a good bit away. It's the mediant relations to the ending key. She doesn't even end in the same key. All right, so that's the Florence Price. Now the John Antill. Let me tell you a little bit about him, because that's somebody you might not have heard of. And so he's from Australia, and writing this corroboree it's kind of sad, because he's famous for this piece, but he wrote other great works, but he's just kind of famous for this one. And it's a good piece, but he also wrote like Symphony on a City and later, and that's a great piece. But getting the score and the recording, it's just almost forgotten. And so this was so successful, maybe that was to his detriment, because he's mainly known for this piece. And so this is a multi-movement suite, I guess you would say, that is depicting his experience from a real corroboree that he attended, I believe, in 1912. Now, a corroboree is an Aboriginal dance ceremony. There could be different reasons for having it, and he says that the men and the women and the children all attend and participate in this event. It's I think it could be sacred or a secular type of event there, but they all participate. But the dancing is usually the men, I believe he says. And so each movement is a musical depiction of one of the types of dances that he witnessed at this corroboree that he went to. And so this would be the various Aboriginal tribes and that would have these corroborees. Now, it very much reminds me of the heritage of the United States. It's not just Native Americans, and there's just one. There's lots and lots of tribes with language and their own culture and their own ways of living, and we have a much oversimplified, flatline view of Native Americans. Same thing with Aborigines. There are many different Aboriginal tribes, and with their own cultures and ways of doing things and their own beliefs and so forth. And so what he's trying to do here is to account for different ones that you can see in the score. This is the Thippa and the Bellbird people, and each movement has to do with different peoples from his home country there. And so this is not a piece that's exemplifying the common practice idiom with the harmonic language with the tonic and predominant dominant. It's tonal, but Roman numeral analysis would be very ineffective. Even a tonal analysis I don't think would be so useful here. It's pitch centric, but this is music from 1946, and he's more interested in sounds and timbres for the effect of depicting this scene, not using certain chords or anything like that. The form is crystal clear, though. The chords, the pitch centers, which pitch center is it? What's the key of this thing? Maybe that's not clear, but the form is unmistakably clear. So it's a very short piece. Let me just play it. It's about 3 minutes long, and then we will wrap up for the day. I would recommend that you have a blank sheet of paper or the template here, and then you mark down as you're hearing. You can flip through the score if you want, but I want to encourage you to put the score away and just go by what it sounds like. I mean, the notes are really small here, and it's much easier to perceive the form orally than visually by notes, stems, beams. Recognize it by the music, not what represents the music, is what I recommend. All right, so this is the John Antill corroboree. This is a second movement, Dance to the Evening Star. Is this a contrast? Is this B? We need to hear A come after this. Also, don't forget the length of the piece. To have a contrast only 20 seconds in, probably not B. This is B. That's a marked contrast. And this can't be C because we didn't go back to A first. And there's our A. That sounds like something different. I don't know if that's C. If it's C, then there needs to be A come after. All right, so we have three different composers. Nathaniel Dett, Florence Price, evoking African-American heritage using rondo form. And the reason why, because the Juba dance itself has a refrain built into it, into the choreography. And so makes sense. I can't give you much information about the corroboree, but I can tell you that he's evoking the Aboriginal heritage with the corroboree. I mean, hence the title and so forth. And so we have three composers here, different composers, but they chose to use rondo for the same purpose, evoking their ancestral heritage. And very clear examples of five-part rondo still. Okay, so let me just show you our table, and then we'll wrap up. So the table for John Antill. And I encourage you to come up with something like this yourself, whether it's measure numbers and times or just the times, but you want to be able to recognize the five-part structure of the second movement from his corroboree. If you have any questions, let me know. And when we go on to subsequent sessions, we're going to continue studying rondo form, get into the 7-part and the 9-part, and some examples that maybe gray area, and they're called rondo, but then we'll discuss, well, is this a good term? Is this a helpful, practical term for aiding our understanding of the shape of the particular piece? And so look forward to getting into that with you. When we return for the lecture, for the theory lecture, we'll have a couple of examples Samuel Coleridge Taylor, picking up kind of where we left off with Florence Price and our Nathaniel Dett. And then we'll also have a Spanish example, Ruperto Chapi, a string quartet by him. And so look forward to getting into those examples in session 19. So we're staying on the schedule. If you have any questions, got any feedback, how this is going for you, check in with us. If you want to show, hey, I came up with a similar graph diagram, send that in to your GE or to me, and we can give you feedback on that. If you had any trouble, I don't understand why this is the B section. How did you know that that's the C? Definitely you want to check in that case, because if you can't recognize it when it's already been composed, then how are you going to compose a rondo yourself? All right, so that's important. To be able to apply the concept, you need to understand the concept, and we want to make sure that you're solid on that. Okay, so we'll sign off for now and look forward to getting into sessions 18 and then 19. We'll continue to study rondo form for the next quite a few sessions. Thank you for listening.